You know that feeling when a game has idle in the name and you think, okay, I'll just let it run and come back later. But then 2 hours pass and you're still there tweaking towers, repositioning defenses, completely sucked in. Well, Zero Stress King caught me exactly like that. And look, on the surface, the game seems pretty simple, but once you start pushing into the harder waves, you realize there's a layer of strategy that most players, myself included, completely ignored. That's why today I'm going to show you 10 advanced tips that will transform your runs from surviving by luck to dominating every wave that appears in front of you. If you really want to speed up your progress in this game, there is one thing that makes all the difference, and that I completely ignored at the beginning: the distance at which you kill the enemies. This isn't a small detail, it is literally the biggest farm multiplier in the entire game. Let me explain why. When an enemy falls into the lava at the end of the path, they don't give you full resources. You lose most of the XP and bread they were carrying. The lava is not your ally here. It's basically a silent trap that will drain your progression without you noticing. The worst part is that the game doesn't shout this in your face. So many people spend hours farming inefficiently without understanding why progress feels stuck. Now, when your units eliminate the enemy before they reach the end of the path, you get the full package: full XP and full bread. It's worth noting, there is one exception. If you have the Lava Diver imp unlocked via a friend or trophy, enemies falling into the lava give slightly more than the standard 10%. But look, it doesn't even compare to what you get by killing them early on the path. So the golden rule here is simple: invest in units with enough range and damage to destroy enemies as early as possible. The further from the lava the enemy dies, the fatter your farm gets. It's the difference between a stalled session and progress that feels like it's flying. There is a classic mid-game trap in Zero Stress King that practically everyone falls into at some point, and I had to learn this the hard way: increasing enemy spawn at the wrong time. The game gives you the option to buy more enemies appearing simultaneously on the screen, and when you see that button for the first time, the logic seems obvious: more enemies, more resources, right? Wrong. The problem is that quantity without enough damage is literally throwing away farming potential. If your DPS can't clear the screen quickly, those extra enemies will reach the lava fully intact and disappear, giving only a tiny fraction of what they would if your units had taken them down earlier. You look at a screen full of enemies and think you're farming well, but in practice, you're wasting every passing wave. The rule is straightforward: only increase the spawn when your DPS is high enough to kill enemies well before the end of the path. When you hit that point, then the spawn increase becomes an absurd multiplier, because every extra enemy falling into your damage zone is giving full resources. It's the difference between filling the screen with flying numbers and actually feeling the farm accelerate. So before you hit that spawn button, stop for a second and look at your field. Are the enemies dying far from the lava or reaching the end? That answer will tell you everything you need to know. Control the spawn with patience, scale the DPS first, and when the right moment comes, then you open the floodgates and watch the resources truly pour in. If you are starting a new run or just did a prestige in Zero Stress King, there is a huge temptation to immediately invest everything in damage. After all, killing enemies faster always seems like the right answer. But there is one resource that matters much more than any damage upgrade in the first few minutes, and that resource is bread. Bread is literally the gateway to almost everything in the early game. Want to summon archers? Bread. Want to scale your units quickly? Bread. Without a solid production of this resource, you'll be stuck waiting, watching enemies pass while your units are insufficient to handle what's coming. It's frustrating, and the cause is almost always the same: neglecting food production too early. Therefore, in the first few minutes of every run or prestige, the strategic focus needs to be on units and upgrades that increase resource generation before anything else. Raw damage comes later, once you have the production base working. Think of it like this: damage without resources is a car without fuel. You can have the most powerful engine in the game, but without bread arriving consistently, you'll stall halfway through. When you finally balance this and bread production is flowing well, the feeling is completely different. Units come out one after another, DPS rises naturally, and the farm begins to sustain itself. It's one of the simplest mindset adjustments in the game, but it makes all the difference between a slow, painful run and one that clicks from start to finish. There is a button that looks like an obvious upgrade right away, but it might actually be sabotaging your progress without you realizing it, increasing the number of enemies prematurely. It seems counterintuitive to ignore something the game places in front of you as an improvement option, but blindly trusting this too early is one of the errors that stalls progression the most. The reason is simple and brutal. If your defense isn't solid enough, those extra enemies won't die to your units. They'll die in the lava. And an enemy that falls into the lava gives you a ridiculous fraction of what they were worth. So you are essentially paying to summon a wave of enemies that will give you almost nothing in return. It's negative farming disguised as progress. The turning point happens when you have maxed out lasers and archers working together. With that damage base established, increasing the number of enemies finally makes sense because your units have the actual capacity to clear the screen before the lava comes into play. That's when the spawn increase stops being a trap and becomes the multiplier it was meant to be from the start. So the tip is to be patient with this specific upgrade. Look at your field, see if your defense is clearing enemies with ease, and only then consider increasing the flow. Getting there in a rush will cost you more time than it saves. When the right moment arrives, you'll feel a difference immediately. One of the most important moments in Zero Stress King is when you look at the screen and realize that progress has simply stopped. Bread is coming in slowly, upgrades seem increasingly expensive, and that feeling of rapid evolution from the beginning has vanished completely. When this happens, many people try to push a little further, farming on autopilot, hoping it will change. But the right answer at that moment is only one: prestige. The classic mistake is waiting too long to reset. It feels like losing the progress of the current run is too high a cost, but in practice, prestige doesn't leave you in the same place you started. It gives you permanent bonuses that stay with you forever, and these bonuses are what truly define the rhythm of your next runs. The sooner you recognize the curve has flattened, the faster you get into a healthy progression cycle. The clearest sign to prestige is exactly the stagnation of food. When bread stops growing significantly, the game is telling you that you've squeezed the most out of this run. Continuing to force it is basically standing still when you could be starting the next run stronger than ever, thanks to accumulated bonuses. And that's exactly where Zero Stress King shows its true colors. Permanent prestige bonuses are what transform the game from something relaxing and casual into something genuinely addictive. Each cycle gets faster, each run takes you further, and you begin to understand why this loop works so well. Prestiging at the right time isn't taking a step back, it's the biggest step forward the game offers. When you start unlocking towers like lasers and ballistas, the first thing that grabs your attention are the damage upgrades. It makes total sense in your head, right? More damage, enemies die faster. And in the early stages, this actually works well. But at some point in the game, especially when the hordes start getting larger, you'll notice that dumping everything into pure damage starts having a much lower return than expected. That's when fire rate becomes the big game changer in advanced levels. Fire rate and reload speed are what truly determine how many enemies your towers can process per second. A tower that fires twice as often, even with lower damage per shot, will clear a large horde much more efficiently than a tower with sky-high damage, but a slow rate that gets stuck on one enemy at a time while others pass by. The reason is both mathematical and practical. Large hordes mean many simultaneous targets. With a high fire rate, your towers are constantly engaging new enemies, maintaining the flow of kills before they get near the lava. With a focus only on damage, you have peaks of destruction, but windows where the tower is reloading and enemies advance without resistance. This difference builds up significantly over a run. So the advice is, in the early stages, balance normally between damage and rate. But when the hordes start getting dense and you feel like enemies are escaping your towers easily, shift the focus. Invest heavily in fire rate and reload speed, and watch how the screen starts being cleared in a much more consistent way. It's the kind of adjustment that looks small on paper, but completely changes the feel of the game. There is a point in progression where the number of enemies on the screen starts to get absurd. And it's exactly at that moment you realize that single target units simply can't handle the job alone. This is when cannons and other area of effect units stop being optional and become absolutely essential for maintaining control. The power of AoE here isn't just in the damage, it's in the efficiency against groups. While an archer is focused on one enemy at a time, a well-positioned cannon can weaken or eliminate several simultaneously with a single shot. When the spawn is high and enemies come in dense waves, this difference in coverage is what separates a defense that keeps up with the pace from one that gradually loses control. Positioning makes all the difference here. Placing your AoE units near the start of the path means groups arrive intact, without separation, maximizing every explosion or damage wave. If you position them too close to the end, the enemies are already spread out, and the area impact loses much of its value. The start of the path is where AoE works, at its peak efficiency. So when you feel your defense is starting to be overwhelmed by quantity, before thinking about more pure damage upgrades, look at your lineup and ask if you have correctly positioned area coverage. Often the solution isn't more brute force, but smart coverage. A well-placed cannon at the start of the track can solve a problem that 10 damage upgrades couldn't. If there is one part that deserves more attention than most people give it, it's the conquest map. At first glance, it looks like just a collection of passive upgrades scattered on a grid, but in practice, it functions as a full skill tree where your choice of route directly defines how fast your progression will move. The problem is that simple attribute nodes are right in the path and seem like quick, safe choices. More damage, more resources, more speed. It's not that they are bad, but they exist alongside nodes that unlock completely new defenders like cannons and mounted knights. And these unlocks provide progression leaps that no attribute bonus can match. The difference between having or not having a cannon available on your field is huge, especially when the enemy spawn starts to increase. Every new defender you unlock through the map isn't just another number on a stat, it's an entire layer of strategy opening up. Cannons bring AoE, new defenders bring different mechanics, and all of this together changes how you set up your defense field. When you prioritize these unlocked nodes, you are essentially compressing your progression curve, reaching a point where the game becomes much more dynamic and efficient much faster. So the next time you open the conquest map, resist the temptation to take the closest node just because it's there. Look a few steps ahead, trace the path that leads to a new defender or a relevant multiplier, and go that way with intention. The incremental upgrades will be waiting when you return, but hitting high impact unlocks early is what really makes the difference between an average run and a run that feels like it's always accelerating. Zero Stress King has idle in the name, but there's a specific moment where stepping out of passive mode and putting your fingers to work makes an absurd difference. The start of each prestige. As soon as you reset, the combination of manual laser with active clicks accelerates the first phase of unit buying in a way that idle mode alone simply cannot replicate. It's a short window, but ignoring it is leaving a huge boost on the table. The reason is that at the beginning of each prestige, you are at 0, your units aren't bought yet, and the field is empty. Every manual click at this moment is directly converting into real progress, helping you pass through the initial phase much faster, and reaching the point where the idle game starts sustaining itself in much less time. It's basically compressing the first few minutes of an entire run with a bit of concentrated manual effort. But even after that initial phase passes and you get into the true idle rhythm, there is an application worth keeping in mind: saving the laser for the right moments. When a large wave is arriving or when you see an enemy advancing dangerously close to the lava, using the manual laser there to guarantee the kill before they fall in is exactly the kind of decision that separates a casual player from someone who is extracting the most from the farm. So think of clicking not as something you do nonstop, but as a strategic tool with two clear uses: accelerating the start of each prestige and intervening in moments where manual killing guarantees full resources that your units might lose. The game was made to be relaxing, but using clicks intelligently in these specific moments is what truly makes the difference between good and great progression. One of the biggest advantages of Zero Stress King is exactly what the name promises. You can leave the game running in the background and just live your life. But there is a condition that needs to be met before you close the screen and go do something else. And ignoring this condition is the difference between the game truly farming for you or silently wasting hours of progression. The rule is simple and direct. Your automatic defenses need to be taking down at least 80% of enemies before they reach the lava. This number isn't arbitrary. It represents the point where passive farming is working with real efficiency. Below that, a significant portion of enemies is falling into the lava and giving you only that tiny fraction of resources, which added up over a long AFK session represents a huge loss of potential. And it's no use consoling yourself with the fact that the lava gives some resources. Yes, you get about 10% of the enemy's value when they fall there, maybe a bit more if you have the Lava Diver Imp unlocked, but 10% versus 100% over hours of idling is a brutal difference that will clearly show when you come back and realize progress was much smaller than it should have been. Passive farming only truly works when the base is solid. So before minimizing the game and putting it on autopilot, stop for a moment and observe the field. Mentally count how many enemies are reaching the lava versus how many are being killed by your units. If you are in the 80% or higher range of kills before the lava, you're good to go. If not, invest a bit more before leaving, because every hour of idling with a solid defense is worth much more than hours with a still inefficient defense.
The chase and the hunt, and I set the pace when I'm running. I always take what I want and I always give it 100. Don't need a bank, no, I'm funded. Play the game like it's nothing.